The MASS Kobo 465 is probably going to be the most expensive amp I ever have in here. Well, maybe I'll exceed it one day. But at 2.5 million yen, or about 17,000 US dollars at today's exchange rate, it is the high end of the high end when it comes to headphone amplifiers. It's hand-built by a guy called Masudori Masuda in Shizuoka Prefecture in Japan. And he hand-builds pro audio gear and small batch hi-fi gear for discerning customers, and including NHK. And actually the microphone I'm using at the moment is one of his microphones, which he sells to NHK for studio use. So someone actually complained that they could hear way too much of what was going on in my mouth when I was speaking. In fact, actually for my previous videos, I switched back to my older shotgun mic. And given that I don't have any aircon or other noisy things on in my room at the moment, that's probably a good thing. But that I wanted to put his mic back in to give you an example of how high quality the gear is he makes. And I've seen him say, customers who bought one of his mic preamplifiers decades ago, sent one back to have something repaired. Being hand built with very carefully selected, tested and matched individual components means that the quality you get is extremely high. And it's not the kind of thing that you go to the website and buy. You go to the website and you order one, non-refundably I might add, and he will build it from then, where you have to wait 1 to 4 months for it to be built and sent to you. So they're a super exclusive amplifier that you can get with the highest quality components and the highest quality design, broadcast grade design. And he will even, if you want, hand deliver the amplifier to you for an extra amount of money depending on which continent you're in. And he even has a version for about 25,000 US dollars with a hand carved artisan front plate. And I actually said, when he sent it over, he said he sent over his Pelican flight case full of actually the 433 as well, the 465, and his entire setup for CanJam. So if you've seen his CanJam setup with the CD players and everything, that's sitting downstairs in my house right now, and I have to send it back. Unfortunately, I only get a week because it has to go to CanJam Singapore as well. So if you're at CanJam Singapore, you'll see me there and you'll see him there, and you can actually check out this very amplifier or these very amplifiers. But you want to know about the amplifiers and, well, is it really worth $17,000 odd dollars? If you're asking, it's kind of, you can't afford it. If you want the best of the best build quality that you can get in a product that is hand built, this is probably it as far as products go. And it's, in terms of setup, I remember the older version used to only have balanced inputs, and this has now balanced and single-ended inputs. And I set it up with my best system, including the TT2 and M scaler. The inputs, if you have a Pro Audio setup, it has a input gains setting for Pro Audio, which will drop the input gains considerably, +4 or -10 basically. And both of these amplifiers have that, but for regular gain, the 433, which is about 2,500 US dollars, doesn't have gain switches otherwise. It's basically a fairly high gain amplifier. And the volume position at 2 o'clock with, I think, -8 on the TT2 was about right for the Expanse. But the 465 has 3 gain settings all the same. So switched on, as well as the inputs, everything is controlled by relays and micro switches like a piece of Pro Audio gear. As far as outputs go, it has, obviously, you have single-ended, and then you have dual 3-pin XLR, which I consider a dead format. I mean, if I ordered one, I'd twist his arm to actually put 1 or 2 4.4mm Pentagon connectors on there. Because even though I keep hearing that people are using it, it's a dead format. And then you have your regular 4-pin XLR output. And with 3 gain levels and 2 input gain levels, you have a lot of variety with which you can use. But I used it primarily with full-sized headphones in medium and high gain, because that's most of what I listen with. But the main amp I compared it with, obviously, was Schiit Audio's Mjolnir and my Studio 6 amplifier. And the Studio 6 amplifier it's off the rack at the moment. It's sitting behind at the moment because I had kind of running out of space, and everything was the wrong shape to sit on this rack without moving a lot of stuff around. But the Mjolnir is something that a lot of people are fairly familiar with, and I thought that even though it's 10 times the price at least, I thought it would be a fair comparison to give to the 465 and actually the 433. Now, I could level match them to, say, a 1 kilohertz tone using an app between both of these and then set a volume level. But the main thing was, when I started listening with the 465, is that You know, you read people online saying, "Oh, I got my new gear in and I started listening, and hours passed and I didn't realize how much time had passed, and it was already so much, such and such a clock." By the time I looked at the clock again, it's like, oh wow. I don't have those moments. I did with the 465. The sound quality is so captivating, and we're not talking sound quality caused by adding harmonics or doing this or doing that. It's designed for pro audio use as much as it is hi-fi, and to be as accurate as possible in its transmission of the original signal. And in doing so, and with such high quality of having matched components which are individually measured and tested so that they're all optimum for the design and everything hand-built to the highest possible quality, the result is it brings through the real musicality of the music. It makes the music captivating because of the music, not because of anything else. One of the tracks I remember the most was Grant Chester Meadows from Pink Floyd's Umaguma album. And that's maybe not their most famous album, but that particular track is kind of unusual even for that album. But I just remember hearing the guitar plucks were so distinct in that track. And it's a very mellow track, but it delivered like even the dynamics of each guitar pluck so well in the middle of that it made it a much more intense experience to listen with. And all music was like that, except if you had a lower quality music, I was listening to some Soundgarden, for example, it couldn't bring through any more quality than the music had. But where the music did have good quality, and Pink Floyd's probably a really good example of this, it brought through what that music had in a way that had absolute maximal intensity. It was absolutely wonderful. And it didn't feel like enhanced intensity. It felt like, if you've ever heard live music, it's designed to bring through as much as possible what live music is like if music is recorded live to begin with. And a lot of mastered stuff is not recorded with anything like the dynamics real live music has. But with those albums, and there I have a few around, which come closer to that, certainly came a lot closer with the 465. So I probably describe it as that it's like to amplifiers what Pink Floyd is like to music, in a way that when you listen to a Pink Floyd album, you hear everything, that's all the nuances that go on in that album, in that it feels kind of like that. And being that, I just remember the console that they recorded all the Pink Floyd albums on was sold some years ago. And I just remember that was such a big deal, and people talking about how amazing it is and how they'd like to get it and record an album on it. And I think there was another console sold recently that was very famous, or a version of a very famous, I think maybe Rupert Neve console that was used to record some famous albums. It might have been the Beatles, actually. And they recorded a whole album on it, and it sounded just amazing. So it has that feeling of like the experience of listening to music at its highest quality on a headphone system. And granted, of course, super high-end speaker systems can do better, but it captured the experience of the music so well that I did lose track of time when I started listening. Yeah. In comparison to the Mjolnir, though, the Mjolnir has that kind of excitement to the sound, depending how you set up, which options you set up, whether you have negative feedback on or off, or push-pull on or off. There's some subtle differences there. And so, for example, push-pull on is kind of more exciting. And it felt like the 465 had that excitement, but then the Mjolnir doesn't have quite the depth the 465 has. I can also plug my headphones into the Master 10 speaker amp, as I do with the less sensitive headphones like the Dan Clark Audio or the Hi-Fi Man Susvara and Susvara Unveiled. And then I can use the gain on the TT2, I can turn that right down. And so I can counter the fact that it's designed for speaker gain and listen and have this really great depth to the music. And I've seen other people do that with other speaker amps. But the thing is, I'd probably say the 465 has the best balance between having that depth and having that intimacy and liveliness that you get with something like the Mjolnir. It doesn't sound as super wide as, say, using a Audio GD amp does. And this seems to correspond with something that Golden Sound measured when he measured a 465, is that the crosstalk, which is the crosstalk between left and right channels, is a little bit high. So it doesn't have the lowest crosstalk, and I think he speculated this was maybe because of the negative feedback system involved. Even though it's a balanced amp internally, it uses, I'm not quite sure of how the details of it, because I don't really have the time to explore this, but due to the way the circuit is set up, it means it doesn't sound as wide as some amps can, especially really top-end totally dual mono, totally balanced headphone amps can. So it does sound a touch narrower, but the micro and macro dynamics are just absolutely outstanding. At the same time, I felt like it had much more depth. Now the 433 on the other hand, which unfortunately doesn't have any gain levels except for the input gain with the Pro Audio at -10 or +4 for regular hi-fi use, that, and you can see the volume control at 2 o'clock, and I had about -8 on the TT2 for using that. That has not quite, it's almost a 465. It's not quite there. And it sounded still a bit deeper and better than the Mjolnir. It's probably closer to, say, the Luxman P750U, which I borrowed from my friend. Now, I don't have one of those in, but it reminded me a lot of the P750U, although the P750U is ever so slightly colored. But I think that the 433 gave a touch more musicality and a touch more depth to the sound than the Mjolnir. And it wasn't a huge thing, but it was a noticeable thing when I was switching A-Bing between them, even level matched. And it didn't matter what I selected on the Mjolnir 3 in terms of settings, it was still the same thing. And the 465, of course, was another level above. So it's definitely, the 465 is one of those amplifiers I wish I could have here for a month, and I wish I had endlessly deep pockets where I could buy a $17,000 US amp and use it for all my reviews and everything like that, because it's genuine, low distortion, high sound quality amplifier. It's designed, again, for pro audio as much as hi-fi audio. It is that kind of design. You see a lot of manufacturers throw out amps that say, look, it has low THD or whatever. That's not true low distortion, because the soundstage ends up dead flat. This has depth to the soundstage, which means it is very well made and has probably extremely fast electronically too, which is not necessarily something you can always say of low-end gear. And so you genuinely can hear what you're getting out of the music, not just, a flat simulation like you get with cheap low distortion amps. So people might ask, how can a $17,000 amp be worth it? If you need to ask that question, you can't afford it. It's one of those things that the people who are going to buy it, including the version with the hand-carved faceplate, which Masuda-san will hand deliver to you for an extra fee, you can actually order that, then yeah, if you're that kind of person who can do it, then you can get probably one of the best built amps ever made. And yeah, if you have to ask, then you're going to be like me and buying a Mjolnir. If you're watching this though and you happen to have a 465, do let me know, and your comments and your experience. If you'd like to actually influence what I review, do consider becoming a supporter as well. Lastly, thanks to Masuda-san for sending over his CanJam set up for me to borrow even for just a week. And also thank you for all my patrons who have made this channel possible, as well as the companies that have and people who have sponsored my CanJam show reports, as well as my channel. Thanks once again for watching, and I look forward to either seeing you online or at CanJam.